There's a strange kind of person who has learned something most people never learn. You'll find them in ordinary places, behind a desk, in a small workshop, on a farm at 5 in the morning, in a garage with the door closed. And if you watch them for a week, you might not notice anything remarkable at all. That's exactly the point. They have discovered that the most important work of a lifetime rarely announces itself. It doesn't post updates. It doesn't ask for applause. It simply gets done day after day while the rest of the world is busy talking about what it intends to do. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because most people have the equation backwards. They believe that talking about a goal is a form of progress toward the goal. They tell their friends, they tell their family, they post the plan, they describe the vision in vivid detail, and something happens in the brain when they do this. A small reward fires, a sense of accomplishment settles in the chest. And here is the tragedy hiding inside that reward. The mind can be satisfied by the announcement of a thing almost as much as by the thing itself. So the announcement becomes a substitute, the talking becomes the work. And months later, sometimes years later, the person is still talking, still describing, still explaining what they're about to build, and nothing has been built at all. This is not a character flaw unique to lazy people. This happens to intelligent, ambitious, well-meaning people. It happens to you and it happens to me, because it isn't a moral weakness, it's a mechanism. The applause of other people is fast, it's easy to get, and it feels almost identical to real progress. Silent work is slow, it's invisible, and for a long time it feels like nothing at all. Given a choice between a small reward now and an uncertain reward much later, most human beings, most of the time, will take the reward now. That's not a defect in your character. That's simply how the machine is built. But understanding the machine is the first step to no longer being ruled by it. So let's ask the real question underneath the title. Why does silence matter? Why would working without announcement, without narration, without the running commentary of "look what I'm doing" actually produce a different and usually better result than working out loud? Here is the first reason, and it's more practical than spiritual. Silence protects the work from premature judgment. Anything you build, a skill, a business, a piece of art, a habit, a relationship, goes through an early stage where it is fragile, unformed, and frankly, not very impressive. If you show that fragile thing to the world too early, the world will do what the world does. It will offer opinions. Some of those opinions will be kind but useless. Some will be sharp and discouraging. And here's the danger: your early stage work cannot yet defend itself. It doesn't have the strength of 10,000 hours behind it. It doesn't have the evidence of results. It is still becoming. And a thing that is still becoming is easily crushed by the wrong sentence spoken at the wrong time by someone who was never invested in your outcome to begin with. Think about a seed planted in soil. If you dig it up every few days to check on its progress, to show your neighbors, to measure how far it's come, you will kill it. Not because checking is evil, but because the seed's early growth happens in the dark, underground, away from interference, protected from wind and foot traffic and casual hands. Silence, in this sense, is not secrecy for its own sake. Silence is a growing condition. Certain things simply cannot develop properly while they are being watched, discussed, and evaluated by people who have no responsibility for how they turn out. Here is the second reason silence matters. And this one is about you, not about other people. When you stop narrating your effort to an audience, you are forced to build your own internal reason for continuing. This is worth pausing on. As long as someone else is watching and reacting, praising you when you show progress, asking about it, expecting an update, a part of your motivation is being borrowed from outside yourself. It feels like your motivation. It is not. It is rented. And rented motivation has to be paid back eventually, usually at the worst possible moment, usually right when the excitement of the audience fades and the real difficulty of the work begins. But when nobody is watching, when there is no update to give, no one to impress, no story to tell at dinner, you find out very quickly whether you actually want the thing or whether you only wanted to be seen wanting it. This is an uncomfortable test, and most people avoid it instinctively without even realizing they're avoiding it. They keep the audience close because the audience keeps them accountable in a shallow way, but shallow accountability produces shallow commitment. Deep commitment is built differently. It's built in rooms where no one is clapping. It's built on the 40th attempt when there's no one to tell about the 39 failures before it. It's built at 11 at night when the only witness to your effort is the version of you that will wake up tomorrow and either respect the person you're becoming or not. Let me give you a picture of two people, because principles like this become real only when we can see them in motion. Picture a woman named Elena and a man we'll call Devin, both starting the same year, both wanting the same thing, mastery of a difficult craft, let's say furniture making, something with real skill behind it, years of learning behind every clean joint and every honest finish. Elena begins documenting everything. Every small win gets shared. Every piece, even the mediocre ones, gets photographed and described with enthusiasm to a growing circle of people who cheer her on. And there's nothing wrong with her, nothing weak about her. She's doing what feels natural, what feels encouraging. For the first year, the encouragement genuinely helps her keep going. Devin does something different, not out of superiority, but out of temperament. He works in his garage most evenings after his regular job. He doesn't mention it much. When people ask what he's been doing, he says, working on some woodworking stuff, and changes the subject. Not because he's hiding something shameful, but because he has nothing yet worth presenting. And he knows it, and he's at peace with that. He ruins wood. He wastes money on tools he didn't need and skips tools he did. He makes a chair that wobbles. He makes another that wobbles less. Nobody sees any of this except him. Now here is what happens by year 3, and this is the part worth remembering. Elena's motivation has started to follow a strange rhythm. She works hardest right before she plans to share something, and slower in the long stretches between. Her skill has grown genuinely, but her progress has become tied to the calendar of her updates rather than the actual demands of the craft. Devin's motivation looks almost boring by comparison, flat, steady, unglamorous. He shows up on Tuesday whether or not Tuesday feels inspiring. But that flatness is exactly what has let his skill compound without interruption. There was no performance to maintain, so there was no incentive to fake competence he didn't yet have, and no incentive to avoid the humbling, clumsy stage that skill always demands before it becomes impressive. By year 5, something has become visible that wasn't visible before. Devin's work has a depth to it that Elena's doesn't quite have yet. Not because he's more talented, but because every hour he spent building was spent building, while a portion of Elena's hours, without her even noticing, had been quietly redirected toward building an image of building. Two very different activities that can look, from a distance, exactly the same. I tell you this not to condemn sharing your progress. There is a place for community, for mentors, for honest feedback from people who know more than you do. That's not what we're examining here. We're examining a much narrower and much more dangerous habit, the substitution of narration for labor, the quiet swapping of look what I'm doing for here's what I've actually done. And that substitution happens so gradually that most people never notice it happening to them. So here's a question worth asking yourself honestly, and I want you to actually answer it, not just let it pass by. How much of your effort this year existed because you wanted the result? And how much of it existed because you wanted someone to witness you pursuing the result? There's no shame in the answer, whatever it is, but you cannot fix what you refuse to name. And this is where real change begins, not with more motivation, not with a louder declaration of your goals, but with a quieter, steadier kind of commitment that doesn't need anyone else in the room to keep functioning. We are just beginning to uncover what working in silence actually demands of a person and what it gives back in return. There is more to say about discipline without witnesses, about the particular kind of confidence that only silence can produce, and about why the loudest people in any room are so rarely the ones who end up building anything that lasts. Let's go deeper into something I mentioned but didn't fully open up, this idea of confidence and where it actually comes from, because most people have been taught a backwards version of confidence. They believe confidence is something you build by convincing others and by performing certainty until it starts to feel real, by collecting enough praise that you eventually believe the compliments yourself. That's not confidence, that's a costume. And a costume, no matter how well made, comes off the moment the wearer is alone with a hard problem and nobody left to perform for. Real confidence is built through a much less glamorous process, and here it is. It's built through the accumulation of private evidence, not public praise, private evidence. Every time you do something difficult without an audience, without anyone confirming that you did it, without a single person telling you well done, you are handing a piece of evidence to the only judge who will be with you for the rest of your life, and that judge is you. And here's what's strange about this particular judge: it cannot be fooled the way an audience can be fooled. You can convince strangers you're disciplined by talking about discipline. You cannot convince yourself that way. You already know what you did and didn't do at 11 o'clock last night when no one was checking. This is why some people can walk into a room full of accomplished people and feel a settled, quiet steadiness, while others, despite having credentials and titles, feel like frauds who might be exposed at any moment. The difference usually isn't talent. The difference is usually the ratio of public performance to private proof. Someone who has spent years quietly doing the work alone, unwitnessed, has built a thick foundation of proof that no compliment gave them and no insult can take away. Someone who built their identity mostly from what others said about them is standing on a foundation that depends on the audience continuing to say nice things, and audiences are famously unreliable narrators. They praise you one season and forget you exist the next. If your confidence was rented from them, it disappears exactly when they stop paying attention, which is usually right when you need it most. Let me put this another way, because I think it's one of the more important ideas hiding inside our title tonight. There are two kinds of self-respect. One is granted, one is earned. Granted, self-respect comes from outside a promotion, a compliment, a certificate on the wall, a number of followers, applause after a talk. It feels wonderful and there's nothing wrong with receiving it, but it was given to you, which means quietly it can be taken away, or it can simply stop arriving. And when it stops arriving, if that was your only source of self-respect, you are left with nothing underneath you. Earned self-respect is different. It comes from the version of you that only you witnessed. The mornings you got up when you didn't feel like it and nobody would have known if you hadn't. The temptation you turned down when no one was there to see you turn it down. The project you finished even after the excitement wore off and the only reason left to finish it was that you had said quietly to yourself that you would. That kind of self-respect cannot be taken from you by a bad review, a canceled contract, or a room full of people who forgot your name. It was never issued by them in the first place. Now, I want to address something directly because if we don't address it, this whole conversation risks becoming naive. Working in silence does not mean isolating yourself from the world, refusing help, refusing mentorship, or treating every form of visibility as corrupt. That would be its own kind of foolishness. There is a real difference between sharing your work when sharing serves the work and sharing your work because you need the reaction to keep going. The first is strategy. The second is dependency. A carpenter who shows a finished piece to a buyer is not violating anything we've discussed tonight. That's commerce, that's contribution, that's the natural conclusion of labor meeting the world. What we are questioning is something narrower and more personal. The habit of needing an audience during the becoming rather than only at the completion. The seed does not need visitors while it's underground. It needs visitors when it's a tree, strong enough to be looked at, touched, tested by the wind, and still standing. There's an uncomfortable truth buried in all of this, and I think it's worth saying plainly instead of dancing around it. A great deal of what people call networking, personal branding, and building in public, in the earliest, most fragile stage of a skill or a business, is, underneath the modern language, simply the old human hunger for approval wearing a new outfit. That doesn't make it evil. It makes it worth examining honestly. Ask yourself if you knew with total certainty that no one would ever find out what you accomplished. There would be no recognition, no post, no mention, no title. Would you still do the work? If the honest answer is yes, you have found something rare, a motivation with its own engine, one that doesn't stall out the moment the crowd looks away. If the honest answer is no, that's not a tragedy either. It's simply information. It tells you that the goal you thought you wanted might actually be a different goal, wearing a disguise. The goal of being seen as someone who achieved it, rather than the goal itself. Let me tell you about a man I'll call Marcus, because his story shows something that statistics alone never quite capture. Marcus spent 11 years running a small manufacturing operation that nobody outside his town had heard of. He wasn't hiding from success. He simply never treated visibility as the point. While competitors spent real money in real time cultivating a public image, appearing at events, chasing recognition in trade magazines, Marcus spent that same time and money doing something almost embarrassingly unglamorous, fixing the small inefficiencies in his own operation that nobody would ever see or praise him for fixing. A better inventory system, a shipping process rebuilt from scratch 3 separate times until it stopped losing money. Relationships with suppliers built slowly, through years of simply being reliable, not through a single dazzling pitch. None of this made an interesting story. None of it would have made a compelling video. And that's exactly why almost none of his competitors were doing it, because unglamorous work doesn't offer the same reward that glamorous work offers. It doesn't get you noticed at the moment you do it. It only pays out later, in a form so delayed that most people lose faith in the connection between the effort and the outcome, long before the outcome ever arrives. 11 years in, Marcus's operation was quietly outperforming competitors, who had spent a decade being far more visible than he ever was. And when people finally did notice, because eventually real results are difficult to hide completely, they made the mistake people always make watching a silent work succeed. They called it luck. They called it timing. They said he must have known someone. And it is always easier for an observer to believe in luck than to accept the far more demanding truth that Marcus simply kept doing for 11 consecutive years, the unrewarded work that almost everyone else abandoned somewhere around year 2, right when it stopped being fun and started being just work. This is the part of the story people don't like to hear, so let me say it clearly instead of softening it. Somewhere around year 2, almost everyone who starts something difficult hits the same wall. The early excitement is gone. The audience has stopped paying attention because the novelty has worn off, and the results still aren't visible yet. This is the exact point where working in silence is tested most severely, because there is no longer even the reward of an interested audience to distract you from the fact that the work is now simply hard. Most people standing at that wall quietly downgrade the goal, or quietly abandon it while telling themselves and everyone else a respectable story about why the timing wasn't right, or the market shifted, or they realized it wasn't really their passion after all. Sometimes that's true. Often, if we're honest with ourselves, it's the wall talking, not the truth. The people who get through that wall are rarely the loudest ones. They're the ones who had already stopped needing applause to keep moving, because they built their reason for continuing somewhere no applause could reach. We still have important ground to cover. What happens to a person's character when they finally break through that silent middle stretch? How patience actually rewires the way you experience time itself? And why the moment you stop needing recognition is often the exact moment recognition finally starts to arrive. That part of the story is still ahead of us. Let's talk now about what actually happens inside a person during that long, unglamorous middle stretch. Because something does happen there, something structural, something that doesn't show up on the outside, but changes everything about how that person moves through the rest of their life. Here is the first shift. A person who survives the silent middle stretch develops a new relationship with time. Most people experience time as something that must be filled with proof of progress, proof of worth, proof that the last 6 months weren't wasted. This is why so many people feel a low, constant anxiety about their own lives, even when things are objectively going fine. They are measuring each week against the question, did this week produce something I can show someone? And when the honest answer is no, a quiet panic sets in, because in their internal accounting, unshown effort doesn't count as real effort. But somewhere in the silence, if you stay in it long enough, that accounting system breaks down and rebuilds itself differently. You begin to measure time not by what it produced that could be displayed, but by what it produced that you can feel in your own capability. A month where nothing was announced, but you got measurably better at something difficult, stops feeling like a wasted month. It starts to feel like exactly what it is, a deposit. And once a person starts experiencing time as a series of deposits instead of a series of performances, something remarkable happens to their patience. Patience stops being a virtue they're forcing themselves to practice through gritted teeth and starts being a natural consequence of trusting the process they're inside of. You don't have to force yourself to be patient with a garden you truly believe is growing. You only struggle with patience when some part of you suspects that nothing is actually happening beneath the surface. This is worth sitting with because I think it explains something people usually get backwards. They believe patient people are simply more disciplined, more emotionally controlled, somehow wired differently. Often it's simpler than that. Patient people usually just have more evidence collected quietly over time. That unseen effort eventually surfaces. Impatient people are often not weaker, they are simply earlier in the process of collecting that evidence, still waiting for their first real proof that the invisible root system beneath a plant is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing before anything above the soil shows it. Here is the second shift, and this one is quieter, but perhaps more important. A person who works through the silent stretch begins to separate their identity from their audience's opinion of them. And this separation is one of the most freeing things that can happen to a human being. Think about how much of modern suffering comes from precisely the opposite condition. People whose sense of self rises and falls with a number, a comment, a glance, a reaction, an approval that may or may not arrive on any given day. That is an exhausting way to live, because it means your internal weather is being controlled by people who, most of the time, are barely thinking about you at all. When you spend real time working without witnesses, you slowly discover that you are still you on the days no one is watching. Your worth was never actually contingent on the observation. It only felt that way because observation was the only measurement you'd been using. Once you find a stable sense of yourself that doesn't require a spectator, you become far harder to manipulate, far harder to discourage, and far harder to flatter into carelessness. Praise stops being oxygen. It becomes what it should have been all along, a pleasant but optional bonus, arriving on top of a foundation that was already solid before the praise showed up. Now let's talk about the strange irony sitting at the center of everything we've discussed tonight, because it is genuinely strange and it deserves to be said plainly. The moment a person stops needing recognition is very often close to the exact moment recognition begins arriving in earnest. This isn't mysticism. There's a practical mechanism behind it. As long as you need the audience's reaction to keep functioning, your work carries a subtle, almost invisible scent of desperation. A person constantly checking whether what they made is good enough, constantly adjusting based on the last reaction they received, chasing the crowd's taste instead of building from their own clear internal standard. People sense that scent, even if they couldn't name it. Work built to be liked tends to feel slightly hollow, because it was optimized for approval rather than for truth. Work built in silence, on the other hand, without a live audience shaping it in real time, tends to develop something sturdier, a point of view, a set of standards that belong to the maker rather than to the crowd, a coherence that only comes from someone building according to their own judgment instead of borrowed judgment. And when that work finally does meet the world, it tends to land differently. People can feel the difference between something built to be approved of and something built to be true, even if they can't always explain why one moves them and the other doesn't. Let me bring this down to something concrete, because principles like this can start to sound abstract if we leave them floating too long. Think of two shopkeepers on the same street. One spends a portion of every day worrying about what customers think, adjusting the store based on the last comment overheard, changing prices, changing displays, changing the entire personality of the business based on whichever voice was loudest that week. The other spends that same time simply getting better at the actual craft of the business, understanding the product more deeply, treating people with consistent decency whether they're buying or not, refining quietly without asking for a verdict after every small change. Customers can feel which shopkeeper has a spine and which one is guessing. Trust doesn't attach itself to guessing. It attaches itself to steadiness. And steadiness, almost by definition, is something you can only build when you're not busy performing for whoever happens to be watching today. There's one more piece of this worth naming before we move toward what all of this demands of you now in your actual life, starting soon. Silence over enough time does something to a person's judgment that almost nothing else can do. It sharpens their ability to tell the difference between real progress and the appearance of progress, because they've had to learn to evaluate themselves honestly, without an audience's applause available to blur the picture. This is a rare skill. Most people lacking practice at honest self-assessment either overestimate themselves out of hope or underestimate themselves out of fear, and both errors are expensive. The person who has spent years quietly checking their own work against their own rising standard, without needing anyone else's opinion to feel finished, develops an internal instrument that is simply more accurate than the instrument most people are using, an instrument calibrated by reality instead of by reaction. So here's where we stand as we move toward the end of this. You now understand why silence protects fragile work from premature judgment. You understand why silence forces a person to discover whether they actually want something or only wanted to be seen wanting it. You understand that confidence built from private evidence is sturdier than confidence rented from public praise. And you understand that the middle stretch, the long, unglamorous, unrewarded middle, is not a punishment to survive, but the actual mechanism by which patience, identity, and judgment get built. What remains is the harder question. the one that actually matters once the theory is finished. What do you do with all of this starting this week, in your actual life, where the phone is still in your pocket? The habit of narrating yourself is still strong, and the work in front of you is still unglamorous, unfinished, and mostly invisible to everyone but you. So let's finish this properly, because a discourse like this means nothing if it ends as an idea instead of becoming a decision. Here is what I want you to do, starting now, not starting Monday, not starting when things settle down, not starting after this next milestone you've been waiting for. Starting now, while the feeling of this conversation is still fresh enough to act on before your old habits reclaim the space. First, identify the one thing in your life right now that you've been narrating instead of building. You know what it is already. It's the goal you've described to more people than you've actually worked on. It's the plan you've explained in detail at dinner tables while the actual first step of it sits untouched. I'm not telling you to feel ashamed of this. Nearly everyone reading or hearing this has at least one. I'm telling you to name it honestly tonight, because a problem you won't name is a problem you can't fix. Find the gap between how much you've talked about it and how much you've actually done, and let that gap tell you the truth, whether you like what it says or not. Second, pick one piece of that work and do it without telling anyone. Not because secrecy is holy, but because you need to find out honestly what your motivation looks like when there's no one to perform it for. If you find yourself reaching for your phone to announce the small step you just took, notice that reach. Don't judge it harshly, just notice it and choose this time to let the moment stay yours. That small discipline repeated is how a person slowly stops renting their motivation and starts owning it outright. Third, give yourself permission to be unimpressive for a while. This might be the hardest instruction in the entire discourse because everything about modern life pushes against it. You are allowed to be a beginner in private. You're allowed to make the wobbly chair, write the clumsy first draft, make the phone call that goes badly, build the version of the thing that embarrasses you a little. Nobody becomes skilled by skipping the unimpressive stage. They only become skilled by passing through it without an audience recording every stumble along the way. Protect your beginning. It has earned the right to be private. Fourth, start measuring your weeks by deposits instead of performances. At the end of each week, instead of asking, "What do I have to show for this?" ask a better question. What do I now understand or know how to do that I didn't understand or know how to do 7 days ago? That single shift in the question you ask yourself will quietly rebuild your relationship with time, the same way it rebuilds it for anyone who practices it long enough to trust it. Now let me leave you with the truth sitting underneath everything we've discussed tonight, the one I want you to carry with you long after the specific stories and examples have faded from memory. The world is loud, and it rewards loudness quickly, but quickly is not the same as lasting. Somewhere near you right now, someone is quietly working on something without telling a single soul, showing up on the unglamorous Tuesday when nothing about the day invites greatness, doing the unremarkable, unwitnessed labor that no one will applaud and no one will ever fully know the cost of. And in 5 years, in 10 years, when the results finally surface, because real results, given enough time, almost always surface, the people around that person will look at what's been built and call it luck. Call it timing, call it a lucky break. They will rarely call it what it actually was. Years of decisions made in rooms with no audience in them at all. You get to decide, starting with what you do after this ends, which kind of person you're going to be. The one who needs the room to be watching before the effort feels worth making, or the one who has learned quietly and completely that the work was always worth doing, whether anyone was ever going to find out about it or not. That is the whole of it. Work in silence. Let the results speak when they're ready. They always are eventually, and when they finally do, they will say more than you ever could have said about yourself.